Remote Alaska is not just cold, it is far away. Once winter sets in, help could be days or completely unreachable. Tonight, you will hear 10 disturbing true horror stories from remote Alaska. Real events that happened where isolation leaves no witnesses and no explanations. Story 1. Last radio signal. There are places in Alaska where winter does not just arrive. It seals you in, buries you alive under 20 feet of snow and endless darkness. And when the last supply plane turns back because of the storm, when the satellite phone goes dead, when you realize nobody is coming until spring, that is when you discover what fear really means. I was the new communications officer for Kivalina Station, a research outpost so remote that our closest neighbor was a dying village 40 miles across frozen tundra. Population of the village, 63 souls. Population of our station, 12 scientists, 3 support staff, and me. My job was simple: maintain the radio equipment, keep us connected to the outside world, make sure we could call for help if something went wrong. Something went wrong. It started the day the winter isolation period officially began. November 18th. The last plane had left 3 days earlier, loaded with the researchers who could not handle a polar winter. Those of us who remained knew the deal. 6 months of darkness, temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in under 2 minutes, winds that turned snow into horizontal knives. We had supplies, we had fuel, we had each other. We would be fine. The radio crackled to life at exactly 3 in the morning. I was not on duty, but the emergency tone woke me from a nightmare I could not remember. I stumbled through the dark hallway to the communications room, my breath forming clouds even inside our heated station. The thermometer outside read -42 degrees. The voice on the radio was frantic, terrified. It came from the village. Station, this is Kivalina Village. We need immediate assistance. People are missing. Something is taking them from their homes. Please respond. Please. It is in the village right now. My hands shook as I grabbed the microphone. I asked them to repeat, to clarify, to calm down and tell me what was happening. But the transmission ended, just cut out mid-sentence, replaced by static that sounded almost like screaming if you listened too closely. I tried calling them back. Nothing. I checked every frequency. Silence. I woke our station chief, Dr. Helena Marsh, a glaciologist who had spent 15 winters in the Arctic. She listened to the recording I had made, her face growing pale in the dim emergency lighting. Get everyone up, she said quietly. Something is very wrong. Within 20 minutes, our entire skeleton crew gathered in the common room. The heating system groaned against the cold pressing in from outside. Someone made coffee that nobody drank. We discussed options. The village was 40 miles away across terrain that was now utterly impassable. Our snowmobiles could not handle it. We had no aircraft. The storm system that had grounded the last supply plane still raged across the region, and weather reports, when we could access them through our failing internet connection, predicted it would continue for at least another week. We could do nothing but wait and try to reestablish contact. I spent the next 6 hours in the communications room, cycling through every frequency, sending out calls, listening to nothing but static and the occasional strange interference that sounded disturbingly organic. Dr. Marsh tried the satellite phone. Dead. Our internet connection, which relied on a tenuous satellite link, functioned intermittently at best. We managed to send a brief email to our headquarters in Anchorage, explaining the situation, requesting a wellness check on the village as soon as weather permitted. The reply came 8 hours later. Weather prohibits any response. Village last reported normal status 3 days ago. Continue monitoring. We'll attempt contact from our end. That was it. We were on our own. The village was on its own. The second transmission came 2 days later. This time, I was ready. Recording equipment running. Every system focused on capturing any signal from Kivalina Village. Station, please respond. There are only 11 of us left now. It comes at night. It sounds like the wind, but it is not wind. We are hiding, but it finds us anyway. The children are gone. All the children are gone. Please, God, please send help. Different voice. Older, male. Absolutely saturated with a horror so profound I could feel it through the speaker. I responded immediately, asking for their location, their status, what they needed. But again, the transmission ended abruptly, this time followed by a sound I will never forget. A low, resonant howling that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, rising in pitch until it exceeded the range of human hearing, leaving only a pressure in my skull that made my nose bleed. Dr. Marsh pulled me away from the equipment. She looked worse than I felt. She had heard it too. That was not wind, she whispered. What was it? I asked. She did not answer. Over the following week, The transmissions became more sporadic and increasingly disturbing. Each one came from a different voice. Each one reported fewer survivors. The things they described made no sense. Something that moved through the village during the endless night. Something that could mimic voices. Something that left no tracks in the snow but took people from locked homes, from hiding places, from anywhere it chose. The scientists at our station began researching. They pulled up old records, indigenous legends, anything that might explain what was happening. Dr. Yuri Volkov, our climatologist, found references to similar events. Isolated settlements throughout Arctic history completely disappeared during winter, bodies never found. In some cases, the entire infrastructure remained intact. Food still on tables, fires still burning, but every living soul simply gone. The Inuit had words for it in their oldest stories, concepts that did not translate well, things that came with the darkness, things that hunted during the polar night, things that were not animals or spirits but something else entirely. Something that had always been there, waiting in the empty places where humans were never meant to survive. We stopped sleeping normally. We kept the lights on constantly, burning through our fuel reserves faster than planned. We stopped going outside unless absolutely necessary. We watched the darkness beyond our windows, and sometimes we saw movement in it. Shapes that were not quite right, shadows that moved against the wind. The final transmission from Kivalina village came on the 17th day of isolation. There are 3 of us left, Sarah, Thomas, and me. We are in the church. It is outside. We can hear it walking. It knows we are here. It is taking its time. When this transmission ends, that is it. Nobody else is left to send another. Tell our families we tried to survive. Tell them we are sorry we brought this on ourselves. What did you do? I asked desperately. What brought this on you? A long pause filled with the sound of breathing and distant, impossible footsteps. We found something in the ice. 3 weeks ago, the ice shelf collapsed near the village. There was something underneath. Old. So old. We thought it was dead. Frozen. We thought we could study it. Document it. We were wrong. It was not dead. It was waiting. The transmission ended with screaming and the sound of wood splintering. After that, silence. No more calls from the village. No more desperate pleas for help. Just empty frequencies and the knowledge that 63 people had died while we sat 40 miles away, completely helpless. Dr. Marsh ordered increased security protocols. We secured every door and window. We set up watch rotations. We tried to continue our research, to maintain normalcy, to pretend that everything was fine. But we all felt it. The awareness that something had changed, that we were not alone in the darkness anymore. 3 nights after the final village transmission, our perimeter motion sensors began triggering. Something was circling the station, moving just beyond the reach of our floodlights. We watched the monitors, seeing nothing but snow and darkness, yet the sensors tracked movement. Large, bipedal, patient. It studied us the way we had once studied the Arctic. Observing, learning, waiting for the right moment. The power began failing in sections. First the east wing, then the storage area. Our backup generators kicked in, but everyone understood what was happening. It was testing our defenses, finding weaknesses, the same way it had dismantled an entire village. Dr. Marsh gathered us in the central hub, the most secure area of the station. She was crying, though she tried to hide it. She told us the truth we had all been avoiding. The supply plane would not return for 4 more months. We could not survive that long, not with something hunting us, not with our power systems failing, not with the fuel running low because we had burned through it keeping every light blazing. We had one option, a desperate, terrifying option. We could trek to the village, 40 miles across the frozen hell. Maybe find supplies there. Maybe find answers. Maybe find a way to survive until rescue came. Or we could wait here and let it pick us off one by one in the darkness. We left at first light, which in the polar night meant the brief gray twilight that passed for noon. 8 of us. The others chose to stay, too afraid to venture outside. I never saw them again. The journey was unspeakable. The cold cut through every layer. The wind screamed threats we almost understood. And behind us, always behind us, we felt its presence. Following, watching, herding us toward the village like prey too stupid to realize we were walking into a trap. We reached Kivalina village after 11 hours of nightmarish travel. The village was intact, homes standing, smoke from some chimneys, but no lights, no movement, no life. We found them in the church, all 63 villagers, arranged in perfect rows like a congregation frozen mid-prayer. Their faces showed no fear, no pain, just blank, empty peace, as if something had simply turned them off like light switches. And in the center of the church, we found what they had pulled from the ice. I cannot describe it properly. The human mind rejects certain shapes, certain geometries that should not exist in nature. It was dead now, truly dead, killed by whatever process the villagers had used in their desperate final moments. But looking at it explained everything. It had been waiting in the ice for thousands of years, waiting for something warm-blooded and curious enough to free it, waiting for the darkness to return. We burned it, burned the church, burned everything. We had to make sure nothing remained. The journey back to the station took 2 days. We moved slower, exhausted, nearly dead from cold and terror. When we finally saw our station lights, we wept with relief. But only 5 of us made it inside. The others disappeared during the night stops, simply vanished from their sleeping bags while the rest of us huddled together, too terrified to sleep, yet somehow missing the moment when they were taken. That was 3 months ago. The supply plane arrived last week. We are the only survivors. 8 at the station when we left. 3 returned. The investigation is ongoing. The official story is equipment failure and exposure. Everyone accepts this. It makes sense. It is comfortable. It is wrong. I know what happened. I know what is still out there, waiting in the empty places. The thing from the ice was not alone. It was never alone. We found one. We killed one. But I have spent enough time in the darkness now. I have learned to see the shapes that do not belong. The movements in the corner of vision. The awareness in the howling wind. They are still there. Still waiting. Still patient. And every winter, the darkness returns to Alaska. Every winter, places become isolated, cut off, forgotten. And sometimes, people disappear in that darkness. Nobody ever finds out why. Nobody ever finds the bodies. And everyone eventually accepts the comfortable explanations. But I know, and now. So do you. And that knowledge is dangerous because once you understand that humans are not the apex predator in the Arctic, once you realize that some things have been hunting in the darkness since long before we built our fragile civilizations, you can never feel truly safe again. Especially when winter comes. Especially when the sun sets and does not rise. Especially when you hear something outside your window that sounds almost, but not quite, like the wind. Story 2. Road that ends too far north. I should have turned around at mile marker 347. That was the last place I saw another human being. And that was 3 days ago. My name is David Marsh, and I am a long-haul trucker. 42 years old, divorced, no kids. They've driven every highway in America, crossed the country more times than I can count. I thought I knew roads. I thought I understood isolation. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I found on Alaska as Dalton Highway that winter. The job seemed simple enough. A delivery contract for a mining operation up near Dead Horse, pushing supplies north before the worst of the winter storms hit. Good money. The kind of money that makes you ignore the warnings. The kind that makes you stupid. The scary part wasn't what I saw at first. It was what I felt. That creepy sensation that crawls up your spine when you realize you've gone somewhere you were never meant to go. Somewhere that doesn't want you. The highway stretched ahead like a gray ribbon cutting through endless white wilderness. Nothing but snow-covered spruce trees and mountains in the distance. The kind of landscape that makes you feel microscopic, insignificant, alone in a way that city people never truly understand. Mile marker 412. That's when I noticed something disturbing. The markers were going up, but my GPS showed I should have reached my destination 2 hours ago. The numbers kept climbing. 428, 445, 461. Numbers that shouldn't exist. The Dalton Highway officially ends at mile 414. I tried my CB radio. Static. Cell phone? No signal. Obviously, I hadn't had bars since Coldfoot, over 200 miles back. But the horrifying part was the silence underneath that static. Not empty silence, waiting silence, like something was listening through the dead frequencies. The fuel gauge showed 3/4 full. I filled up at Coldfoot like always. That should have been my first real warning that something was terribly wrong. Evening came fast that far north in December. The darkness up there ISN to like darkness anywhere else in America. It is thick, heavy. It presses against your windows like something solid, something hungry. My headlights cut 2 pale tunnels through the black, illuminating nothing but endless road in the swirling snow that had started to fall. Mile marker 503. Still climbing north. Still no sign of civilization. No mining camps. No rest stops. No other vehicles. Just road and trees and mountains that seemed to lean in closer with each passing mile. That's when I saw the first truck. It sat just off the shoulder, half buried in a snowdrift. A big rig like mine. Red Peterbilt, maybe 15 years old. The driver, his door hung open. No tracks leading away from it. No signs of anyone nearby. Just an abandoned truck sitting there in the suffocating dark, its cab light still glowing weakly inside. I should have kept driving. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to keep moving. But truckers have a code. You don't leave another driver stranded in conditions like these. Not up here where the cold kills you in hours. So I pulled over, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out into the nightmare. The wind hit me like a physical force. -30 degrees. Easy. Maybe colder. My breath froze instantly, crackling in the air. But the unsettling part wasn't the cold. It was the smell underneath it. Something rotten. Something dead. Something that shouldn't be able to rot in temperatures this low. I approached the abandoned truck slowly. Snow crunched under my boots, each step sounding too loud in the eerie quiet. The cab light illuminated the interior just enough to see. Empty driver, a seat. Half-eaten sandwich on the dashboard, frozen solid. Coffee in the cup holder turned to brown ice. And on the windshield, scratched into the frost from the inside, 3 words that made my blood run colder than the air around me. Don, to go further. My hands were shaking, and not from the freezing temperature. Someone had written that, recently enough that the scratches were still clear. But where had they gone? There were no footprints in the snow except mine. No tracks leading into the forest. Nothing. I backed away from the truck, my flashlight beam jerking across the darkness. That is when I saw the second vehicle. Another 18-wheeler, this one blue, about 50 yards beyond the first. Then a third, a fourth, all different colors, different companies, different years. All abandoned, all with their doors hanging open and their cab lights glowing like dying fireflies in the overwhelming dark. 7 trucks in total, spread out over maybe a quarter-mile of highway. 7 drivers who had simply vanished into the Alaskan wilderness. 7 people who had gone too far north and found something that wouldn't let them turn back. I ran to my truck, started the engine, slammed it into gear and did a U-turn right there on the highway, tires screaming against the ice. I was heading south, back to Coldfoot, back to civilization, back to reality. Mile marker 503. Still, I drove for 30 minutes, foot heavy on the accelerator, watching the markers pass by my window. 503, 503, 503, the same number, over and over, no matter how far I traveled. The road stretched ahead and behind, identical in both directions, like I was caught on some horrible treadmill of asphalt and snow. That is when the fuel gauge started dropping. Fast, too fast. In the space of 5 minutes, it went from 3/4 to half. 10 minutes later, a quarter. The engine sputtered, died, coasted to a stop in the middle of that cursed highway. Silence crashed over me like a wave. No engine, no heater, just me and the darkness and the knowledge that I had maybe 4 hours before hypothermia took me. Maybe less. I grabbed my emergency supplies. Blankets, flashlight, the flare gun I carried for 15 years and never used. Then I did something that still haunts me. I looked in my side mirror. They were standing there, between my truck and the abandoned vehicles behind me. Figures, maybe a dozen of them. Too tall to be human. Too thin. They stood perfectly still in the falling snow, just at the edge of my headlights' reach. Watching, waiting. I didn't breathe. Couldn't breathe. These things, these shapes in the darkness, they weren't moving, but somehow they felt like they were getting closer. Like the space between us was collapsing without them taking a single step. One of them raised its arm, pointed north. The gesture was slow, deliberate, terrifying in its simplicity. Go forward. Keep going. Don, to turn back. My radio crackled to life. Voices poured through the speakers. Dozens of them, hundreds, all speaking at once in a horrible chorus. Keep driving. We're almost there. Just a little further north. We're waiting. We're all waiting. Some voices were desperate. Others were angry. Some were laughing. But underneath them all was something else. Something that wasn't a voice at all. A sound like grinding ice. Like the earth itself splitting open. I fired the flare gun through the window. The red light exploded across the snow, illuminating everything in a crimson glow. The figures were closer now. Much closer. I could see their faces, or where faces should have been. Empty, smooth, like someone had erased their features. Like someone had taken away everything that made them human and left only the shape. The flare died. Darkness returned. The figures were gone, but I could feel them out there, circling, hurting, pushing me in the only direction they would allow. North, always north, to whatever waited at the end of this impossible road. I made a choice then. Maybe not a smart one. Maybe not even a sane one. But it was mine. I stepped out of the truck with my flashlight and started walking. Not north, not south, east, into the forest, into the trees, away from the road that should never have existed. The snow came up to my knees. Every step was agony. The cold bit through my clothes like teeth. But I kept moving because staying meant accepting what those things wanted. Staying meant becoming one of the voices on the radio. One of the empty figures standing in the dark. I don't know how long I walked. Hours, maybe days. Time stopped meaning anything out there. But eventually, impossibly, I saw lights through the trees. Real lights. Warm and yellow and human. A ranger station. Impossibly far from where it should have been. Sitting there like a gift. The ranger who found me half frozen on his doorstep said I walked 40 miles through the wilderness. Said it was a miracle I was alive. Said I must have gotten confused, turned around, ended up way off course. He showed me a map. The Dalton Highway ended at mile 414, exactly where it always had. There was nothing beyond it. Nothing but wilderness. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. And sometimes, late at night, my CB radio still picks up those voices. Calling, begging, ordering, come back, finish the drive. You belong here now. I sold my truck, found a job in Arizona, as far south as I could get. But I still check the news from Alaska, still watch for reports of missing truckers on the Dalton Highway. And every winter, when the darkness comes early and the cold settles in, I see more names. More faces. More people who went too far north and found the road that never ends. The disturbing truth is that the highway is still there. Still stretching deeper than maps show. Still pulling people in. Still adding to its collection of empty trucks and vanished drivers. The horrifying reality is that something up there, something ancient and patient and endlessly hungry, has learned to mimic the roads we built. Has learned to trap us using our own civilization against us. I survived. I got away. But I left something behind on that nightmare highway. Part of my mind, part of my soul. And on the coldest nights, when I'm alone with my thoughts, I wonder if I really escaped it all. Or if I am still out there, still driving, still watching those mile markers climb higher and higher into numbers that shouldn't exist. Because the most chilling thing I said, what happened to me? It's what I realized in that moment when the figures pointed north. They weren't keeping me from going back. They were keeping me from seeing what was behind me. They were warning me that south was already gone. That the road had closed itself off. That the only direction left was forward, into whatever darkness waited at the end. And somewhere up there, past mile marker 999, past the place where maps give up and GPS signals die, something is still waiting. Still patient, still hungry for the next driver who ignores the warnings and pushes just a little too far into the Alaskan winter. Dawn, to drive the Dalton Highway in December. Dawn, to go past Coldfoot. And if you see mile marker 347, for God, is sake, turn around. Because some roads, Dawn, they lead anywhere you want to go. Some roads only know one direction. And some highways in the far north of America were never built for the living at all. In remote Alaska, distance becomes a threat. Story 3. Airstrip nobody uses anymore. I found the airstrip by accident, and that is the truth that haunts me most. If I had known what waited there in the darkness, I would have turned my plane around the moment I saw those cracked runways stretching across the empty desert like scars on dead skin. My fuel gauge was dropping fast. That is what led me there, to that forsaken place nobody talks about. I had been flying small cargo runs across Nevada for 3 years, always the same routes, always the same lonely highways glowing beneath my wings at night. But that December evening, something went wrong with my fuel line. A leak I didn't notice until the needle started falling faster than it should, faster than physics allowed. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of red that looked too much like blood. I scanned my charts with shaking hands, searching for anywhere to land before my engine died and turned my small Cessna into a metal coffin. That is when I saw it on the old map I kept in the cockpit, a backup from before everything went digital. An airstrip marked in faded ink, 20 miles west of my position. The notation beside it said it was operational, used for supply drops to mining operations in the area. I had no choice. The engine was already coughing, that terrible sound every pilot fears, the sound that means you have minutes, maybe seconds, before you re-falling. The airstrip appeared below me just as the last light was dying. Two runways forming an X shape in the middle of absolute nothing. No buildings nearby, no lights, no signs of the mining operations the map mentioned. Just pale concrete surrounded by desert scrub and creeping shadows that seemed darker than they should be. The place looked abandoned, forgotten, like something the world had deliberately turned away from. I brought the plane down hard. The landing gear screamed against the concrete, and I could hear pieces of rubber tearing away from the wheels. But I was down. I was alive. The engine died the moment I rolled to a stop, as if it had been holding on just long enough to deliver me here. The silence that followed was wrong. That is the only word for it. Wrong. In the desert, there should be sounds. Wind, insects, something. But the air outside my cockpit was absolutely still, pressing against the windows like it was waiting for something. I sat there as darkness swallowed the sky, trying to convince myself everything was fine. I had emergency supplies, a radio. Someone would respond to my distress call. I would spend an uncomfortable night in the plane and be rescued by morning. Simple, reasonable. But when I tried the radio, all I got was static. Not the normal kind you can tune through. This was different. Underneath the white noise, there was a pattern. Like breathing, like something listening to me listen to it. That's when I noticed the hangar. It sat at the far end of the eastern runway, barely visible in the dying light. I hadn't seen it from the air, which seemed impossible given its size. The structure was massive, easily big enough to house a dozen planes. But it crouched low against the ground, as if trying to hide. My survival training said to stay with the plane, wait for rescue, but my fuel leak meant I had no way to run the heater, and December in the Nevada desert meant the temperature would drop below freezing within hours. The hangar might have shelter, maybe even a working radio or supplies left behind. I took my flashlight and started walking. The concrete beneath my feet was strange, covered in marks I initially took for weather damage, but as I looked closer, they resembled scratches. Long, deep gouges in the concrete, running in parallel lines toward the hangar. Like something with claws had been dragged across the runway, or had dragged itself. The hangar doors were partially open, hanging crooked on rusted hinges. The gap between them was wide enough for a person to slip through, but narrow enough that I had to turn sideways. The metal groaned as I squeezed past, and the sound echoed inside the hangar for far too long, as if the space within was much larger than it should be. My flashlight beam cut through absolute darkness. The hangar was empty. No planes, no equipment, just a vast concrete floor stretching into shadow and metal walls rising up to a ceiling I couldn't see. But there was something else. Writing, covering every surface. The walls were layered with messages, some painted, some carved, some written in substances I didn't want to identify. Dawn, to land after dark. It watches from below. The winter knows your name. They never left. The messages repeated, overlapping, some obviously years old, others disturbingly fresh. In the far corner, I found a more detailed warning, written carefully in what looked like motor oil. Emergency landing parties. November 1987. Official investigation deemed all 6 personnel missing, presumed dead. No remains recovered. Airstrip closed. Do not use, but my map said operational. Current, unless it wasn't current at all. Unless no one had updated those old maps because no one came here anymore. Because pilots knew better than to land here, especially in winter. I should have run back to my plane right then, but the cold was already seeping into my bones. And I saw something in the darkest corner of the hangar that looked like it might be a door. Maybe to an office with a working phone or radio. Maybe to answers about what happened to those 6 people. The door was unlocked. Beyond it, stairs descended into the earth. Concrete steps leading down into a darkness my flashlight couldn't penetrate. Each step was marked with a number, painted in white. 1, 2, 3. I counted as I descended, thinking it would help me keep track of how far down I went. At step 40, I should have been well below ground level. At step 80, I knew something was impossible about this place. The stairs kept going, 100 steps, 150. The numbers continued, leading into depths that couldn't exist beneath a desert airstrip. I finally stopped at step 200. Not because I wanted to, but because my flashlight beam had found something below. The stairs ended at a massive room, and what I saw there made my mind struggle to understand what my eyes were showing me. Planes, dozens of them, packed into an underground chamber that had no right to exist. Small aircraft like mine, cargo planes, even what looked like an old military bomber from World War II. all of them showing signs of emergency landings. Damaged gear, torn metal, but all of them intact enough to have made it down. I moved between them, my light catching registration numbers. Some I recognized from news reports over the years. Planes that vanished, pilots who never came home. Everyone assumed they crashed in the desert, their wreckage lost in the vast emptiness. But they were here, all of them here. In the cockpit of a Cessna similar to my own, I found a logbook. The last entry was dated 3 winters ago. The pilot had made an emergency landing due to fuel problems, just like me. He had found the hangar, just like me. He had seen the warnings but went below anyway, searching for help. The entry ended mid-sentence. Something is moving between the planes. Not human, I can hear it breathing. It sounds like wind through empty spaces. It sounds like the word was cut off. The pen had torn through the paper, as if whoever was writing had been pulled away violently. That's when I heard it. The breathing, coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond my light, moving between the rows of dead aircraft. Not the breathing of an animal or person. Something else. Something that sounded like air moving through caves deep in the earth, like wind through bones, like the final exhalation of everyone who died here. I ran back to the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, my flashlight bouncing wildly. Behind me, I could hear something following. Not footsteps, something scraping, dragging, rising up from the depths like it had been waiting decades for someone to disturb it. I burst through the door into the hangar and slammed it behind me. Through the metal, I could hear scratching, the same pattern as the marks on the runway. Long claws working at the door, testing it, learning it. I sprinted across the hangar floor toward the gap in the doors. The scratching followed, moving along the walls now, surrounding me. In my peripheral vision, I caught glimpses of something keeping pace. A shadow that moved wrong, that bent at angles that made my eyes hurt. That seemed to exist in more dimensions than 3. I squeezed through the doors and ran for my plane. The moon had risen, full and bright, and in its light I could see clearly now what I had missed before. The airstrip wasn't abandoned. It was used, just not by anyone human. The concrete was covered in markings, not random patterns, symbols arranged in circles around both runways, converging on the hangar. This wasn't an airstrip. It was a trap, a snare built to catch anything that flew over the desert in distress, to draw it down with electromagnetic interference that would drain fuel, corrupt instruments, make pilots see runways that led only to hunger in the dark. Something emerged from the hangar doors. I couldn't look at it directly. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. But I felt it, ancient, patient, feeding on the fear and desperation of everyone who landed here seeking shelter. Growing stronger with each plane it pulled from the sky, I reached my Cessna and threw myself inside. The engine was dead. I knew it was dead. But I turned the key anyway, sobbing, praying, begging anything that might listen. The engine caught. Impossible. But it did. Maybe it had just enough fuel left for one more miracle. Or maybe something wanted me to escape. Wanted me to tell this story. Wanted more pilots to hear about the abandoned airstrip and think maybe the warnings were exaggerated. Maybe they could land there safely. Maybe their luck would be different. I didn't. Wait. I gunned the engine and raced down the runway. The plane shaking apart beneath me. Metal screaming. Something was chasing me. I could see its shadow in my mirrors, stretching across the concrete, reaching for my tail section. The plane lifted just as the shadow touched it. I felt the aircraft shudder, felt something try to drag me back. But momentum carried me up into the night sky, and the thing below couldn't follow. I made it to the nearest town on fumes and prayers. I filed my report with the FAA. They listened politely and sent investigators. They found the airstrip, confirmed it had been officially closed since 1987, and said they would update all charts and databases to reflect its status. But they checked those databases. The airstrip ISN listed is closed. It is not listed at all. Like it doesn't officially exist. Like it never did. When I called the FAA to ask why, the person I spoke to said they had no record of my report. No record of any investigation. They suggested I was confused, maybe suffering from hypoxia during my emergency landing. I know what I saw. I know what was waiting there in the desert, beneath that hangar, in the darkness 200 steps down. And I know it is still hungry, still patient, still sending out its call to any pilot desperate enough to land there. Last week, I heard about a cargo pilot who went missing during a winter flight across Nevada. They found his plane 2 days later, abandoned on a remote airstrip nobody uses anymore. The engine was cold, the cockpit was empty, and on the runway beside it, fresh scratches led toward a hangar at the far end. The search team said they would investigate further, but when I checked the news again, there was no follow-up. No mention of the pilot at all, like he had been erased, or like someone decided his disappearance was better left alone. I don't fly that route anymore. I don't fly at all now. Every time I close my eyes, I see those stairs descending into impossible depths. I hear that breathing that wasn't breathing. I remember the way the shadow moved, hungry and patient, waiting in the dark beneath the desert for the next distressed plane to find the airstrip. And I wonder how many other places like it exist. How many traps scattered across the empty spaces of America, disguised as salvation, marked on old maps as safe havens. How many desperate pilots have landed seeking shelter and found only the terrible thing that waits below, growing stronger with each disappearance, each mystery, each person who dismisses the warnings as legend. The locals near that airstrip know something is wrong there. They see the planes that land and never leave. They hear things in the desert during winter, when the temperature drops and the darkness lasts longest. They know why pilots stopped using that place. But they don't talk about it, because some things are better left forgotten. Some places are better left alone. And some warnings should be heeded, no matter how desperate you become. I'm telling you this now because you need to know. If you ever fly over that part of Nevada and your instruments start acting strange, if your fuel gauge drops faster than it should, if you see an airstrip below that promises safety, to land. No matter what, to believe the maps. To trust your instruments. Keep flying. Run your engine until it dies and take your chances with the desert floor. Because landing on that airstrip means descending those stairs. It means joining the others in the darkness below. It means becoming food for something that has waited far too long to ever let you leave. The airstrip is still there. Still waiting. Still hungry. And in winter, when nights are longest, it calls out to anyone desperate enough to answer. To be the one who does. Story 4. Ice road crossing. Have you ever felt ice crack beneath your feet and known, with absolute certainty, that you are about to die? That horrifying sound, that deep groaning from below, is the last thing most people hear before the frozen river swallows them whole. I heard that sound. I survived it. But what happened on that cursed stretch of the Koyukuk River was so much worse than drowning. I was a long-haul trucker running supplies between Fairbanks and the remote mining camps north of the Arctic Circle. Winter ice roads were my specialty. Dangerous work, but the pay was incredible. You drive where there are no roads, across frozen rivers and lakes, gambling your life that the ice will hold your rig. Most winters, I made 6 figures in 3 months. Most winters, I came home alive. February in Alaska means darkness, cold that cracks steel, and ice thick enough to support fully loaded semis. The Koyukuk River crossing was legendary among ice road drivers. 15 miles of frozen river serving as the only winter highway to the northern camps. The ice there typically measured 4 feet thick. Safe, reliable. We had been using it for decades, but that year, something was different. The ice was acting strange. Locals from the nearby village of Husla whispered warnings about the river. They said the ice was angry. They said it was hungry. They said their ancestors had stories about winters when the river refused to freeze properly, when it lured travelers onto its surface and then consumed them. I dismissed it as superstition. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was ignoring the weather reports. A warm front was moving in, unusual for February but not impossible. Temperatures were climbing from -30 to -10. The ice would thin, but I calculated I still had time to make the crossing before conditions became truly dangerous. 3 other trucks were making the run with me. We traveled in convoy for safety. 4 experienced drivers, 4 powerful rigs, all of us pushing our luck because the mining company was paying triple rates for emergency supplies. We reached the river crossing at dusk, which in February meant around 3 in the afternoon. The sky was that deep purple-gray color that passes for daylight in the Arctic winter. Our headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the massive expanse of ice stretching before us. The entry point was marked with reflective poles and flags. The route across was clear. 15 miles, 90 minutes of careful driving, then safety on the far shore. I was third in the convoy. Leading us was Jake Morrison, a veteran with 20 years of ice road experience. Behind him was Sarah Chen, tough as nails and fearless. I followed Sarah. Behind me came Tommy Redding, a rookie on his second season. We spread out across the ice, maintaining safe distances between our rigs. Standard procedure: if one truck breaks through, the others have time to react. The crossing started normally. The ice felt solid beneath my tires. My rig's weight distribution system showed everything in the green. I kept my speed steady at 15 miles per hour, exactly as trained. Through my CB radio, I heard Jake calling out progress markers. Mile 1, Mile 2, Mile 3. Then the creepy noises started. Deep groans from beneath the ice. Booming sounds that echoed across the frozen expanse like distant thunder. I had heard ice sing before. All drivers have, but this was different. This sounded almost intentional, almost alive. The frequency and pattern felt wrong, like the ice was responding to our presence, tracking our movement. At Mile 5, Jake's voice came through the radio, tense and worried. He reported seeing cracks forming ahead of him, spreading across the ice in patterns that made no sense. Cracks do not typically form in perfect circles. They do not branch out in geometric designs that look almost decorative. But that is what his headlights were illuminating. Beautiful, terrifying patterns spreading across the ice like frozen spiderwebs. We slowed down. Jake consulted his instruments. The ice thickness gauge still read safe levels. 4 feet of solid ice beneath us. But the cracks kept spreading, and the groaning sounds grew louder, more insistent. Sarah suggested we turn back. I agreed. Even Tommy, despite his inexperience, could feel the danger building. But Jake made the call. We were past the point of no return. Turning around and backtracking 5 miles over ice that was clearly unstable made no sense. We had 10 miles ahead to the far shore. We had already crossed the deepest part of the river. Logic said we should continue forward. Trust the instruments. Trust our experience. Trust the ice. We trusted wrong. At Mile 7, Tommy's truck broke through. No warning. No gradual sinking. One moment he was there, his headlights in my mirrors. The next moment, nothing but darkness and the sound of metal screaming as his rig plunged through ice that should have held 10 trucks. The CB erupted with his terrified shouts. He described the water rushing in, the cab filling impossibly fast, the horrible cold. He described the ice closing over him like teeth, sealing the hole through which he had fallen. Then his radio went dead. His emergency beacon activated, but we could do nothing. The ice between us and his position was clearly compromised. Any rescue attempt would send more trucks through. We could only watch his beacon signal on our GPS and know he was dying down there in the freezing darkness beneath the ice. Jake ordered us forward. Survival mode now. Push for the far shore. No stops. No hesitation. Sarah and I acknowledged. We increased speed, gambling everything on momentum and prayer. The ice groaned louder, as if frustrated that it had only caught one of us. That is when I noticed the shadows, moving beneath the ice, visible in my headlights, shapes gliding under the frozen surface, keeping pace with my truck. My first thought was fish, maybe pike or salmon trapped under the ice. But these shapes were too large, too purposeful in their movement, and they were following me, matching my speed, swimming in formation like they were herding me somewhere. The disturbing reality hit me. These were not fish. I had no idea what they were, but they displayed an intelligence that made my skin crawl. They moved with coordination, with intent, and I was absolutely certain they had something to do with Tommy's truck going through the ice. Mile 9, the shadows multiplied, dozens of them now, surrounding my truck, creating an escort of dark shapes gliding beneath the ice. Through the CB, I heard Sarah screaming. Her truck was breaking through, not all at once like Tommy, but gradually. Her rear wheels had punched through a weak spot, and her rig was tilting backward, the trailer dragging her down. She fought it, gunning her engine, trying to pull herself forward onto solid ice. For a moment, it looked like she would make it. The front wheels held, the engine roared, then the ice beneath her cab simply opened up like a mouth, and she dropped through. Her screams over the CB will haunt me forever. She described hands reaching up from the water, hands grabbing her, pulling her down, hands that were too cold, too strong, too numerous to be human. Her beacon joined Tommy's, 2 signals glowing on my GPS, marking graves in the frozen river. Jake's voice came through the radio, steady, calm, the voice of a man who knows he is already dead but refuses to panic. He told me to keep driving, to not stop no matter what. He said the ice was hunting us. Those were his exact words. The ice was hunting us. He said the old stories from Hustle were true. The river had something living in it, something ancient, something that waited beneath the ice every winter for travelers stupid enough to cross. Mile 11. My instruments started failing. Temperature gauges showed impossible readings. The outside thermometer claimed it was 70 degrees. The ice thickness monitor flickered between 4 feet and 0 feet. My GPS coordinates jumped randomly, placing me miles from my actual location. The truck's computer systems were going haywire, infected by something that should not be able to affect electronics. The shadows beneath the ice grew more agitated. They swirled around my truck in tightening circles. I felt the ice beneath me shifting, buckling, preparing to give way. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed at me to stop, to abandon the truck, to run. But run where? I was miles from either shore, surrounded by compromised ice, with things in the water that had already killed 2 people. I did the only thing I could. I prayed and kept driving. Mile 12. Jake's truck broke through. I watched it happen in the distance ahead of me. His headlights suddenly tilted skyward, then disappeared as the ice swallowed his rig. But Jake had one last act of defiance. He had unhooked his trailer just before going through. The massive container sat on the ice, blocking part of the path ahead but creating an obstacle that might disrupt whatever was happening beneath the surface. His voice came through one final time, gasping, drowning, but not describing water or cold. He described a place beneath the ice that should not exist. A space, a cavity in the river that was not filled with water, a hollow where things lived. Things that had been there long before humans came to Alaska. Things that fed on anyone foolish enough to cross their territory. His beacon went active. 3 signals now. 3 graves. Mile 13. I was sobbing, terrified, certain I was next. The shadows beneath me had multiplied into a solid mass of dark shapes completely surrounding my truck. The ice ahead showed more of those geometric crack patterns, creating a maze of structural weaknesses. I had no clear path forward. Then I saw it, a gap in the patterns. A corridor of unmarked ice leading toward the shore. It looked intentional, a trap, an invitation. The things beneath the ice were herding me exactly where they wanted me to go. But I had no choice. It was the only possible route. I aimed my truck down that corridor and pushed my speed to 25 miles per hour, faster than safe. But safety was already a joke. The ice to either side of the corridor collapsed as I passed. Not breaking randomly, but falling away in sequence, timing perfectly with my movement, like something was triggering the collapses from below. I was threading a needle that was actively trying to close on me. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would burst. My hands locked on the wheel. My foot pressed the accelerator to the floor. Mile 14. Almost there. The far shore was visible ahead. The solid ground beyond the ice. Salvation. Freedom. Life. The shadows beneath me surged forward. A final attempt to stop me from escaping their trap. I felt my rear wheels sink slightly, then catch. The ice cracked but held. 1 more mile. 60 more seconds. That is when I saw the reflections in my windshield. Faces. Dozens of faces staring up at me from beneath the ice. Not quite human. Not quite anything I could recognize. Pale. Hungry. Ancient. They watched me with expressions I cannot describe. Not hate. Not curiosity. Something else. Something that made me understand I was an intruder in their domain, and they resented every human who dared cross their river. Mile 15. My tires hit gravel. Solid ground. I gunned the engine up the shore ramp, putting distance between myself and that cursed river. I drove another 10 miles before I dared stop, parking at a pullout where I collapsed over my steering wheel and wept for my dead friends. The investigation found nothing. The ice had closed over the breakthrough points. Search and recovery teams could not locate the trucks. The 3 beacons continued transmitting for 2 days, then simultaneously went silent. The official report blamed unusual ice conditions and driver error. The Koyukuk River crossing was closed for the remainder of the season. But I went back, once. During summer when the river flowed free, I hired a boat and a local guide. We navigated to the approximate locations where my friends went through. The river there is shallow, 15 feet deep at most. You can see the bottom. Clear water, sandy bed. Nothing unusual, except there are no trucks down there. No debris, no bodies, nothing. The guide, an elderly Athabascan man, saw my confusion. He told me the old story, the real one, about the river, its hunger, about the hollow places beneath the ice where the river keeps what it takes, about the things that live in those hollows. He said the river only opens those spaces during winter, only feeds during the dark months. He said his people had known this for generations. They had tried warning us, but we did not listen. I quit ice road trucking. I still drive, but only southern routes. Highways and interstates. Normal roads. Safe roads. Roads that do not crack beneath you and drag you down into impossible spaces where ancient things wait to add you to their collection. But every winter, when the temperatures drop and the rivers freeze, I think about that crossing. I think about Tommy and Sarah and Jake down there in the hollow places beneath the ice. And I think about how many other rivers across Alaska might harbor similar horrors. How many other crossings might be feeding grounds for things we do not understand. The ice roads are still used. Trucks still cross the Koyukik every winter after it reopens. Most make it safely, but every season, a few do not. A few break through, a few disappear beneath the ice and are never recovered. And every season, the official reports blame equipment failure, driver error, unusual conditions. Everyone accepts the comfortable explanation. Nobody wants to believe the terrifying truth that some places are not meant for humans, that some routes should never be traveled, that sometimes the ice beneath you is not just frozen water, but a doorway to something ancient and hungry and patient. I survived the ice road crossing, but I left part of myself down there in that frozen darkness. The part that believed the world made sense. The part that trusted solid ground beneath my feet. Now I know better. Now I understand that there are thin places in this world where reality wears through and something else shows itself. And once you have seen through to the other side, once you have looked into those pale, hungry faces staring up from beneath the ice, you can never unsee it. That knowledge follows you forever. A shadow in your mind. A creepy whisper in the dark. A reminder that we are never as safe as we pretend to be. And the ice remembers everyone who crosses it. Always. Winter turns isolation into something permanent. Story 5. Trail that vanished under snow. I found my hiking partner, his camera 3 months after he disappeared. The last photo on it still gives me nightmares, and I'm about to tell you why you should never trust a trail marker in fresh snow. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a search and rescue volunteer in Colorado. Been doing it for 12 years. I've pulled lost hikers off mountains, found kids who wandered too far from campgrounds, recovered bodies from avalanche zones. I thought I'd seen every kind of danger the Rockies could throw at someone. I was wrong, dead wrong. It started last February during the worst blizzard we had in decades. 3 feet of snow in 48 hours, temperatures dropping to -20. The kind of storm that makes experienced outdoorsmen stay home. But my buddy Jake Harrison, a documentary filmmaker from Denver, had been planning this winter expedition for months. He wanted footage of the old mining trails above Silverton for some horror podcast project he was working on. Abandoned mines, ghost towns, that creepy, unsettling stuff that gets views on YouTube. I told him to wait, told him the storm was too dangerous, but Jake was stubborn, and he knew I'd come along to keep him safe. So we headed up the Kendall Mountain Trail on a gray morning that felt wrong from the very beginning. The sky pressed down like a lead ceiling. The wind carried sounds that didn't match anything natural, and the forest, usually alive with the chatter of birds and the rustle of small animals, sat in horrifying silence. The trail markers were clear at first, bright orange diamonds nailed to trees every 100 feet, easy to follow even with snow coming down. We hiked this route a dozen times before, 5 miles up, 2 miles along the ridge, then down through the old mining district. Simple, safe, familiar. Mile 3 is where everything changed. The snow intensified, not just falling anymore, but swirling around us in thick, disorienting sheets. Visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet. Jake wanted to turn back, but I checked my GPS. We were closer to the summit shelter than to the trailhead. Push forward, wait out the worst of it, then descend when conditions improve. Standard procedure, logical, reasonable, except the GPS coordinates started acting strange. Jumping around, showing us in 3 different locations within the span of a minute. Then the screen went dark. Dead battery, even though I decharged it that morning. Jake's phone died 30 seconds later. Both devices, fully charged, both gone. We relied on the trail markers, followed those orange diamonds through the screaming wind and the blinding white. But the distances between them started changing. Sometimes we see the next marker after 50 feet. Sometimes we walk 200 yards without finding one. And the trees they were nailed to looked wrong. Too tall, too twisted, species I didn't recognize growing at an elevation where they shouldn't exist. That's when I realized something deeply disturbing. The trail beneath our feet had vanished completely, not covered by snow. Vanished. We were walking through untouched powder 3 feet deep with no indication that any path had ever existed here. No depression in the landscape. No cleared corridor through the forest. Nothing. Jake noticed it too. I could see the fear spreading across his face like frost on a window. We'd been following those markers for over an hour, and we were nowhere near anything we recognized. The mountains around us had the wrong shapes. The valleys fell away at angles that didn't match the topography we knew. We were lost, completely, impossibly lost in terrain we hiked dozens of times. The scary part was what came next. We found another marker, freshly painted. The orange was too bright, too vivid against the gray and white landscape. And underneath it, carved into the tree bark, were words that made my skin crawl. Keep following. Not a warning, not directions, an order. A command scratched into frozen wood by something that wanted us to continue deeper into the wilderness. Deeper into the nightmare. Jake filmed it. I remember him holding up his camera with shaking hands, documenting this creepy discovery like the professional he was. He panned across the endless trees, the swirling snow, the marker with its disturbing message. Then he lowered the camera and pointed ahead. There was a cabin, a structure that absolutely should not have existed anywhere near this location. Built from dark logs, windows covered with boards, a stone chimney leaking thin gray smoke. Someone was inside. Someone had a fire going. In the middle of a blizzard, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of mountains that made no sense. We approached carefully. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the cold was getting worse. My fingers were numb. Jake, his lips were turning blue. We needed shelter or we'd die out here. The cabin was our only option, no matter how eerie it felt. The door opened before we could knock, just swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a single room lit by a fire that burned without crackling, without any sound at all. The flames moved wrong, flickered in patterns that hurt to watch, and the shadows they cast on the walls weren't the shadows of flames. They were shapes, figures, dozens of them, pressed flat against the wood like insects trapped in amber. Jake went inside first. I followed, every muscle in my body tight with tension. The temperature inside wasn't much warmer than outside. My breath still fogged the air. But the wind stopped. The howling ceased. The silence that replaced it was somehow worse. Heavy, expectant, like the cabin itself was holding its breath. That is when I saw the photographs. Dozens of them pinned to every available surface. Polaroids. Old ones, judging by the faded colors and the clothing styles. And every single picture showed the same thing. Hikers standing at trail markers. Different people, different years, different seasons. But always the same expression. Confusion, fear, the dawning realization that they were somewhere they shouldn't to be. The most chilling photograph was tucked in the corner, newer than the others. It showed two men in winter gear standing at an orange trail marker. The image quality was too good for a Polaroid. Digital, recent, and I recognized the men in the picture immediately because one of them was me, and the other was Jake, and the photo had been taken approximately 30 seconds ago from an angle that should have been impossible. Jake grabbed my arm, pointed to the far wall. More photographs were appearing, materializing out of nothing. Pictures of us walking through the forest, us finding the first strange marker, us approaching the cabin, a complete record of our journey developing in real time across the wooden surface like a horrifying time-lapse of our own doom. We ran, burst through that door and back into the blizzard without thinking, without planning, pure animal panic driving us forward. The storm had worsened. The snow came down so thick I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. But we ran anyway, crashing through drifts, bouncing off trees, our lungs burning with frozen air. Do you know when I lost Jake? One moment he was beside me, his breathing harsh and ragged. The next moment I was alone in the white, calling his name into the wind and hearing nothing back. I kept running until my legs gave out, collapsed in a drift and waited for hypothermia to take me. That is where the actual rescue team found me 6 hours later, half a mile from the Kendall Mountain trailhead, rambling about cabins and photographs and trails that led nowhere. They searched for Jake for 3 weeks. Brought in dogs, helicopters, thermal imaging. Found nothing, not a footprint, not a piece of gear, not a single trace. It was like he evaporated into the mountain air. The official report said he fell into an abandoned mine shaft. Probably died on impact. Case closed. But I knew better. I knew what we found up there. 3 months later, a day hiker discovered Jake's camera wedged under a rock near the summit. The memory card was still intact. The rescue coordinator called me in to review the footage, hoping it might provide closure. Hoping it might explain what happened. Most of the video was exactly what I remembered. The hike up, the storm worsening, the strange markers. But the final 30 seconds, the footage Jake shot after we separated, that is what broke something fundamental in my understanding of reality. The video showed Jake running through the forest, the camera bouncing wildly. His breathing came in terrified gasps. Then he stopped, turned around, pointed the camera behind him. And there, clearly visible through the falling snow, were the trail markers. Hundreds of them, thousands, covering every tree as far as the eye could see, all pointing in different directions, all freshly painted, all impossible. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was what stood among the trees. Figures, tall and thin and utterly still, watching Jake with eyeless faces. And as the camera panned across them, I realized I recognized some of those figures. Saw familiar jackets, familiar gear. The faces were wrong, stretched and distorted, but I knew them. Hikers who had gone missing over the years. People I had searched for. Bodies we never recovered. They were all there, standing silent in the snow. And they were all holding cameras, all filming Jake the same way he was filming them, creating an endless loop of documentation, an eternal record of people who followed the trail markers too far and found something that wouldn't let them leave. The video ended with Jake screaming. Not words, just a raw sound of pure terror and realization. Then static. Then nothing. I quit search and rescue that day. Moved to Phoenix. Flat, hot, nowhere near mountains or snow or forests. But I still check the missing persons reports from Colorado. Still watch for hikers who vanish without explanation. And every winter, when the big storms hit the Rockies, I see the numbers climb. More people gone. More families without answers. More photographs that will never be pinned to cabin walls that exist in spaces between trails. The horrifying truth is that the trails are alive. Or something using the trails is alive. Something that learned our markers, our systems, our methods of navigation. Something that can create paths that lead away from reality and into pockets of wilderness that shouldn't exist. And once you read deep enough, once you've followed enough markers into the unknown, there's no way back. The trail you walked in on has vanished under snow that never melts, never fades, just accumulates year after year, burying the path home under layers of impossible white. Jake is still up there. I know he is, still filming, still documenting, still adding to the collection of lost souls trapped in the spaces between the mountains. And on quiet nights, when I close my eyes, I can see those trail markers in my mind. Orange diamonds glowing against dark trees, each one an invitation, each one a lie, each one saying the same thing in letters I can finally read. Keep following. We're almost there. Just a little further. We're waiting. We've always been waiting. And we have so many photographs to show you. Don, to trust trail markers after heavy snow. Don, to assume you know a path just because you've walked it before. And if you ever find yourself in the mountains during a blizzard, surrounded by markers that multiply and change and lead you in circles, turn around. Ignore them. Walk downhill, follow streams. Do anything except trust the trail, because some paths dawn to lead to summits or shelters or safety. Some paths only lead deeper into the darkness, and the only way out is to become part of the nightmare yourself. Story 6. Station that went silent. The rescue team found me sitting in the communication room with my hands frozen to the desk, and I still cannot explain what happened to the other 7 people at Station Coldbrook. This is the truth, and it haunts me every single day. I was the new meteorologist, fresh out of training, assigned to a remote Alaskan outpost that collected atmospheric data for government climate research. The station sat 200 miles north of Fairbanks, accessible only by helicopter or snow vehicle, surrounded by nothing but frozen wilderness and darkness that lasted 20 hours a day in deep winter. 7 of us lived there during the coldest months, rotating shifts, monitoring instruments, transmitting data back to headquarters every 6 hours. It was January when the disturbing silence began, when the temperature outside hit 60 below zero and the darkness felt thick enough to touch. When something changed in the static between our radio transmissions, and I started hearing voices that should not have been there. The first night I noticed it, I was alone in the communications room during the graveyard shift. Everyone else was sleeping in their quarters, and the station was filled with the usual sounds. The heating system rumbling, metal contracting in the cold, wind screaming across the tundra like something dying. Normal sounds I had gotten used to during my first month there. I was transmitting our routine data packet when I heard breathing underneath the static. Not my own, something else. Something that paused when I paused. That seemed to be listening to me through the radio waves. I told myself it was interference, solar activity, my imagination running wild in the isolation and darkness. But the breathing continued, and beneath it, I could hear something that sounded like whispers. Words I could almost understand, spoken in voices that sounded wrong. Too deep, too hollow, like they were coming from somewhere very far away or very far below. I filed my report with headquarters and mentioned the strange interference. They said they would look into it but seemed unconcerned. Radio anomalies happened all the time in the Arctic. The ionosphere played tricks. The aurora created distortions. Nothing to worry about. But 2 days later, our lead researcher, Dr. Sarah Vance, came to me with a terrifying discovery. She had been reviewing our atmospheric readings and found something impossible in the data. Temperature fluctuations that made no scientific sense. The air outside was 60 below, but our instruments were detecting pockets of warmth moving across the tundra. Heat signatures that traveled in patterns, that circled the station at night, that seemed to be searching for a way inside. We checked the instruments, calibrated them, ran diagnostics. Everything was functioning perfectly. The readings were accurate. Something was out there in the frozen darkness, something that generated heat, something that moved with purpose and intelligence. That night, the fear in the station became real. We all felt it, the creeping sense that we were not alone, that something was watching us through the small windows, that the darkness outside was filled with more than just empty wilderness. Dr. Vance decided we needed to contact headquarters immediately, that we needed to report this anomaly and request an early evacuation. But when I tried to use the radio, all I got was that horrible breathing. Louder now, more insistent, and beneath it, the whispers had become clear enough to understand. They were saying our names, all 7 of us, repeating them over and over like a chant or a prayer or claiming. I tried every frequency, every channel, every emergency protocol we had. Nothing worked. The breathing was on all of them, filling every bandwidth, blocking every transmission. We were cut off, isolated, trapped in the station with something circling outside that knew exactly who we were. The heating system failed that night. Not gradually, but all at once, like something had deliberately shut it down. Within an hour, the temperature inside dropped below freezing. We gathered in the common area, wearing every layer we owned, trying to decide what to do. Some wanted to stay together and wait for headquarters to notice we had missed our scheduled transmission. Others wanted to attempt the emergency trek to the backup shelter 5 miles away, even though traveling in 60 below darkness was essentially suicide. We argued about it for hours while the cold crept deeper into the station, while frost formed on the walls, while our breath came out in clouds that hung in the air like ghosts. That is when we heard the knocking, coming from every wall at once. A steady, rhythmic pounding that traveled around the station, testing each surface, searching for weakness. The sound was horrifying because it was methodical, patient. Whatever was out there was not attacking wildly. It was being careful, thorough. It knew we had nowhere to go. Our security specialist, Marcus Webb, grabbed a flashlight and moved toward one of the windows to look outside. I tried to stop him, tried to tell him that looking was a mistake, but he was military trained and believed in confronting threats directly. He reached the window, pressed his face against the ice-covered glass, and aimed his light into the darkness. What he saw made him scream. Not a shout of fear, but a raw, terrible sound that came from somewhere primal and broken. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to speak but had forgotten how. We asked him what he saw. He would not answer. He just kept backing away from the window, shaking his head, repeating the same word over and over. Below, below, below. Before we could press him further, the knocking stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise had been. We stood frozen in the common area, listening, waiting. The wind outside had died. The station was absolutely still. Even the groaning of metal in the cold had ceased. Then the floor beneath us began to vibrate. Softly at first, then stronger, like something massive was moving underneath the station. Our outpost was built on permafrost, on ground that was supposed to be frozen solid year-round. But I could feel it shifting, could hear cracking sounds coming from below, could sense something rising up through earth that should have been impenetrable. Dr. Vance understood what was happening before the rest of us. She had been studying geological surveys of the area, had seen something in the data that she had dismissed as instrument error. But it was not error. Beneath Station Coldbrook, there was a cave system, an extensive network of tunnels and chambers carved into the permafrost, existing in a state that should not be possible. Warm, thawed, hollow, and something lived down there. Something that had been sleeping or waiting or existing in the darkness beneath the frozen ground. Something that our presence had disturbed or awakened or attracted. The floor in the eastern corridor collapsed first. One moment it was solid. The next it was gone, revealing a black opening that exhaled warm, foul-smelling air. The heat that poured out was unnatural, carrying with it the scent of decay and something else. Something chemical and wrong that burned our throats and made our eyes water. We backed away from the opening, but more floor sections were failing. The station was being undermined, deliberately excavated from below. Whatever was down there was not just aware of us. It was actively trying to get to us, to pull us down into the darkness where it lived. 3 of our team members decided to risk the emergency trek to the backup shelter. They bundled up, grabbed supplies, and headed for the exit. I watched them disappear into the darkness beyond our door, their flashlight beams swallowed almost immediately by the night. We agreed to check in by handheld radio every 15 minutes. They never made the first check-in. After an hour of calling and getting no response, we accepted that they were gone. Lost in the darkness, or taken by whatever was circling out there, or fallen into the frozen ground that was no longer solid. The 4 of us who remained gathered in the communication room, the most central part of the station, the area farthest from the external walls and the failing floor. We blocked the door with equipment and took turns keeping watch while the others tried to sleep. But sleep was impossible. The sounds coming from beneath us made sure of that. Scratching, dragging, something moving through the tunnels under our feet, traveling in patterns that seemed designed to disorient and terrify us. And the breathing had returned, coming through the radio speakers now even though the equipment was turned off. Steady, patient breathing that seemed to fill the entire room. On the 3rd night of our isolation, Marcus broke. The experience at the window had shattered something inside him, and the constant darkness and cold and fear finished the job. He stood up suddenly, walked to the blocked door, and started removing the equipment we had piled there. We tried to stop him, but he was strong and determined and beyond reason. He told us he understood now what was below. He said it had shown him while he looked out the window, had projected images directly into his mind. The thing beneath the station was old, ancient. It had been trapped in the permafrost for thousands of years, frozen but aware, conscious but immobile. And our station, with its heat and vibrations and electromagnetic emissions, had slowly thawed the ground around it, had given it the warmth it needed to move again. It was grateful, Marcus said. It wanted to thank us. It wanted to show us what it had been dreaming about during all those frozen centuries. All we had to do was go below, go down into the tunnels, accept its invitation. Before we could restrain him, he opened the door and walked out into the corridor, toward the largest opening in the floor. We heard him descending, heard his footsteps echoing in the hollow spaces below. Then we heard him scream, not in fear this time, but in something worse, recognition, understanding, the sound of someone who had seen what waited in the darkness and realized they had made a horrible mistake. The screaming stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was complete and final. The 3 of us left barricaded ourselves in the communication room and waited. For rescue, for death, for whatever was going to happen next. We had no heat, no way to call for help, no hope of surviving if we tried to leave. All we could do was endure. Dr. Vance was the next to disappear. I fell asleep during my watch shift, the cold and exhaustion finally overwhelming me. When I woke up, she was gone. The door was still blocked. The windows were sealed, but she had vanished from a locked room, as if she had simply ceased to exist. The last person besides me was our cook, a quiet woman named Elena who had worked at remote stations for 15 years. She had seen a lot of strange things in isolated places, had lived through equipment failures and extreme weather and the psychological stress of darkness and confinement. But nothing had prepared her for this. She sat in the corner, rocking slowly, humming to herself, staring at something only she could see. I tried to keep her engaged, tried to talk to her, tried to maintain some connection to sanity and hope. But she was fading, slipping away, and when I touched her shoulder to check on her, her skin was cold. Far too cold, like she had been frozen from the inside. She stopped breathing an hour later, just quietly died while staring at the wall. I checked for a pulse, for any sign of life. But she was gone. The cold had taken her, or something else had. I was alone in the station, surrounded by darkness and failing structure and the constant sounds of something moving beneath me. I knew I was going to die there. I accepted it, made peace with it, But I also knew I needed to leave a record. Some explanation for whoever found me. So I went to the communication equipment and started typing this account, documenting everything that happened, everything I knew and suspected and feared. That is when the radio crackled to life. A voice came through, clear and strong and completely normal. Headquarters. They were calling us, responding to our missed transmissions. They said a rescue team was on the way. That weather had delayed them for days, but they were coming now. They would be there in hours. I tried to respond, tried to transmit, but my hands would not work properly. The cold had frozen my fingers to the keyboard. I could not move them, could not type, could not send any message back. All I could do was wait and listen to the sounds beneath me growing louder, more insistent, as if the thing below knew rescue was coming and was desperate to finish what it had started. The rescue team found me 12 hours later, hypothermic but alive, frozen to the desk but conscious, the only survivor of Station Coldbrook. They searched for the others, found no trace, no bodies, no evidence. The floor collapses I described were there. The openings into darkness were real, but when they sent cameras down into those spaces, they found nothing. Just frozen earth, solid permafrost. No tunnels, no chambers, no warm air or signs of anything living below. The official report said equipment failure and extreme weather caused the deaths. Psychological stress from isolation led to poor decisions. The missing personnel wandered out into the storm and were lost. I was found in shock, suffering from hypothermia and delusions brought on by oxygen deprivation. But I know what happened. I know what was under that station, what rose up through impossible tunnels, what took my colleagues one by one into the darkness below. And I know it is still there, waiting, patient, frozen again but aware. The station was abandoned after that. The government called it too remote, too dangerous, too expensive to maintain. But I think they know something I do not. I think their instruments detected what was below. I think they chose to leave it alone. Sometimes I still hear the breathing in my sleep, the whispers saying my name. And I wonder if I really escaped, or if something followed me back from that terrifying place. Something that waits in the darkness, growing stronger, preparing to surface again when the conditions are right. The station that went silent has a story, a chilling truth that nobody wants to hear. But I am telling you now, I am warning you, some places in the frozen north hold secrets that should never be disturbed. Some darkness should never be explored, and some silences are not empty. They are full of horror, waiting for the next person foolish enough to listen. Some places are too far away for answers. Story 7. Silent Zone. Do you know what it sounds like when an entire forest goes silent? Not quiet, silent. No wind through the trees. No animals rustling in the undergrowth. No birds. No insects. Nothing but your own heartbeat pounding in your ears. And the horrifying realization that every living thing has fled from something you cannot see. I know that sound. Or rather, I know that absence of sound. And I know why the locals in Talkeetna refuse to enter the woods near mile marker 147 on the Parks Highway, especially in winter. I was a wildlife photographer working on a documentary about Alaskan winter ecosystems. My specialty was capturing footage of animals in their natural habitats during the harshest months. I had spent 3 winters in Alaska and considered myself experienced. I knew the dangers: bears, moose, hypothermia, avalanches. I respected the wilderness and took every precaution, but I had never heard of the Silent Zone until it was too late. The warning came from an old woman at a gas station in Talkeetna. I was loading supplies into my truck, preparing for a week-long solo expedition into the Talkeetna Mountains. She watched me with this disturbing intensity, then approached and asked where I was headed. I showed her my map. I had marked a pristine valley near mile 147, a location famous for wolf sightings and untouched wilderness. Perfect for my documentary. Her face went pale. She grabbed my arm with surprising strength and told me to choose anywhere else. Anywhere. She said that place was wrong, that locals avoided it, especially in winter, that people who went in there sometimes did not come back the same, and some did not come back at all. She refused to explain further, just kept repeating that I should not go there, that the silence in those woods was unnatural, that something had happened there long ago and the land had never recovered. I thanked her politely and ignored her advice. I had heard similar warnings before in remote areas. Superstitious locals protecting their territory from outsiders. Urban legends designed to keep tourists away. I was not afraid of ghost stories. I was a rational person with scientific training and expensive equipment. I had a satellite phone, emergency supplies, and enough experience to handle anything the wilderness could throw at me. I was wrong on every count. The drive to mile 147 took 3 hours through increasingly desolate terrain. The park's highway in winter is beautiful but lonely. Miles between any signs of civilization. Just endless snow-covered forest and mountains that seem to watch you pass. I reached my turnoff point as the weak winter sun started its early descent. In Alaska's interior, December daylight lasts maybe 4 hours. I had timed my arrival to set up camp before darkness fell. The Forest Service road leading to the valley was barely visible under fresh snow. I engaged four-wheel drive and pushed deeper into the woods. The trees grew denser, taller. The shadows between them seemed darker than normal, even accounting for the late afternoon gloom. My truck's thermometer showed negative 20 degrees, standard for this time of year, but something felt off. The air had a thickness to it, a pressure that made my ears pop. That was when I noticed the silence. Complete and total silence. My truck's engine seemed obscenely loud in the absence of any other sound. No wind, no creaking branches, nothing. I had been in quiet forest before, but this was different. This felt intentional, imposed, like something had declared this area a sound-free zone and nature had obeyed. I told myself I was being paranoid. The old woman's warnings had gotten into my head. I was creating fear where none existed. I continued driving until I reached a clearing that would serve as my base camp. The location was perfect, sheltered by trees on 3 sides, with a clear view of the valley below. I could see game trails in the snow. This was prime wildlife territory. I set up my tent and equipment as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Working in the eerie silence was unsettling. Every sound I made seemed amplified and wrong. The zipper on my tent sounded like screaming. My boots crunching in the snow sounded like bones breaking. I started talking to myself just to fill the void, but my voice felt small and quickly swallowed by the oppressive quiet. Full darkness fell by 4:30. I lit my camp stove and prepared dinner, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. The stove's hiss was the only sound besides my own movements. I activated my camera's motion sensors around the perimeter of camp. Standard practice for wildlife photography. If anything moved within 50 feet, the cameras would record it. I retreated to my tent as the temperature dropped further. My thermometer read negative 30. Cold enough to kill in minutes without proper gear. I was safe in my winter-rated sleeping bag, but I could feel the cold pressing in from all sides, testing the tent's defenses, looking for weaknesses. Sleep came slowly. The silence made it impossible to relax. In normal wilderness, you drift off to the sounds of the forest. The wind, distant animal calls, the settling of snow. Here, there was nothing, just my breathing and heartbeat. And eventually, something else. Footsteps in the snow outside my tent. Heavy, deliberate, circling the camp. But here's what made my blood freeze. The footsteps made no sound. I could feel them, the vibrations through the ground, the displacement of air, but they produced no actual noise. Something was walking around my tent in the terrifying silence, and whatever it was defied the basic physics of sound. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating pristine snow around my camp. No tracks, no disturbances, but I could still feel the presence. Close, watching, waiting. I checked my motion sensor cameras. They had triggered, all 6 of them, dozens of alerts. But when I reviewed the footage, I saw nothing. Empty forest, undisturbed snow. Yet the sensors had detected movement. Large objects passing directly in front of the lenses. The cameras had seen something, recorded something, but that something was not visible in the footage. The next 3 hours were a nightmare of psychological terror. The footsteps continued circling, sometimes close enough that I could hear breathing. Except I could not actually hear it. I could sense it, feel it in my chest. The pressure of respiration from something massive and alive. But the silence remained absolute. Around midnight, the scratching started on the tent fabric. Long, dragging sounds that I felt more than heard. Like something with claws was testing the material, searching for an entry point. I sat in my sleeping bag, flashlight clutched in shaking hands, watching the tent walls flex under invisible pressure. I should have run, abandoned my gear and driven away. But fear had paralyzed me, and some deep, stupid part of my brain kept insisting this was not real. That I was experiencing hallucinations from the cold or carbon monoxide poisoning or stress. That nothing could exist in the way this thing seemed to exist. Dawn came as a gray, weak light filtering through the forest. The moment the first rays appeared, the presence vanished. The pressure lifted. I stumbled out of my tent, exhausted and terrified. My motion cameras showed hundreds of triggers throughout the night. continuous movement around my camp. But the footage showed nothing. I packed up, decided to leave. This place was wrong in ways I could not explain. But when I reached my truck, I found it disabled. The battery cables had been disconnected. Not cut, not damaged, carefully disconnected and removed. They lay in the snow beside the truck, arranged in a perfect circle. No animal does that. No natural phenomenon explains it. Something with intelligence and intent had trapped me here. I reconnected the battery with numb fingers and tried starting the truck. The engine turned over once, twice, then died. I tried again. Nothing. The fuel line had frozen, something that should not happen with winter diesel. I was stranded, mile 147 in December with limited supplies and something in the forest that should not exist. I radioed my emergency contact using the satellite phone. The connection was terrible, full of static and strange interference that sounded almost like whispering. I managed to convey my location and situation before the signal died completely. Help would come, but not for at least 24 hours. Maybe longer if weather turned bad. I spent the day fortifying my camp and reviewing footage, looking for any clue about what I was dealing with. That is when I noticed something in the background of several shots. Trees, specific trees that appeared in multiple frames. But the trees had moved. Not swaying in wind, moved positions. A pine that had been 50 feet away in one shot was 30 feet away in the next. The forest itself was rearranging around me. The horrifying implication hit me. The silent zone was not just a location where strange things happen. It was the strange thing. The entire area was somehow alive, aware, and it was playing with me. As darkness fell again, I prepared for another night of terror. But this time, something changed. The silence broke. Sounds returned to the forest. But they were wrong, distorted. I heard wind that moved in the wrong direction. I heard animal calls that did not match any species I knew. I heard my own voice calling out from the darkness, saying things I had never said. The thing in the silence zone had learned to mimic. It had spent the previous night studying me, recording my sounds, my movements, my patterns. Now it was playing them back, testing them, using them against me. I heard my truck, its engine starting in the distance, even though I had the keys in my pocket. I heard myself screaming for help from multiple directions. I heard footsteps that now made sound but came from everywhere at once. The entity had realized that silence scared me, so it had switched tactics. Now it was overwhelming me with noise. I lasted until around 3 in the morning before I snapped. I grabbed my emergency flare gun and fired it into the darkness. The bright red light illuminated the forest, and for just a moment, I saw them. Shapes between the trees, dozens of them, tall, thin, raw, not quite solid, not quite transparent, existing in that horrifying space between visible and invisible. They were not creatures. They were parts of something bigger, appendages of the forest itself. The silence zone was not haunted. It was a single organism that had learned to manipulate reality within its boundaries. And I was an intruder in its body. The rescue team found me the next morning, hypothermic, delirious, babbling about living forests and invisible things. They got me to a hospital in Anchorage, treated me for exposure and exhaustion. The official report said I had experienced a psychological break brought on by extreme isolation and cold. But one of the rescuers, an older man who had lived in Talkeetna his whole life, visited me in the hospital. He told me I was lucky, that others had gone into the silent zone over the years. Some came back changed, unable to sleep without noise, unable to tolerate quiet. Some came back missing time, hours or days they could not account for. And some never came back at all. Their camps found abandoned, equipment intact, but no sign of the person. He said his grandfather had told him the old story. That place was wrong long before white people arrived. The indigenous tribes avoided it. They said it was a thin place where something else pressed against our world. A consciousness that predated humans and resented our intrusion. They said it grew stronger in winter when darkness dominated and the cold made people vulnerable. He told me to forget what I saw, to never speak of it, to never return. He said the silent zone let me go, but it would not be so merciful twice. Some places in Alaska are not meant for humans. Some wilderness is too wild. Some silence is not empty but full of things we cannot perceive. I left Alaska the day I was discharged. I have not returned, but I still wake up some nights to that absolute silence, feeling invisible footsteps circling my bed, sensing that vast alien awareness studying me from somewhere beyond normal perception. The silent zone let me leave, but it kept a part of me. Some connection that never fully broke. And sometimes, In the dead of night when the world is very quiet, I swear I can feel it reaching across the distance, checking to see if I am still here, still remembering, still afraid. Because that is what it feeds on. Not flesh, not blood, fear, isolation. The horrible knowledge that we share this world with things we cannot understand. Things that were here first. Things that will be here long after we are gone. Things that wait in the silent places for foolish people like me who refuse to believe the warnings. Mile marker 147 is still there. The silent zone still exists. And people still ignore the warnings, still venture in looking for adventure or footage or proof. Some come back, most do not. And those who do return carry that silence with them forever, a shadow in their minds, a void where sound should be, a constant reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved and some horrors are too terrible to be real yet too real to be denied. Story 8. Remote Alaska After Dark. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in the darkness beyond Coldfoot, Alaska. There are places in this world that stay empty for a reason, and those reasons have nothing to do with weather or economics or distance from civilization. Some places are abandoned because people who go there learn a terrifying truth that cannot be unlearned. I was a long-haul trucker running supplies up the Dalton Highway, that lonely stretch of gravel and ice that connects Fairbanks to the oil fields at Prudhoe Bay. 500 miles of nothing but wilderness, mountains, and a darkness so complete in winter that it feels like driving through the end of the world. I had made the run dozens of times over 3 years, always in daylight, always following the rules that every driver learns their first day on that road. Never stop between stations. Never leave your truck after dark. Never investigate anything you see in your headlights that does not make immediate sense. But on December 16th, my engine threw a rod 70 miles north of Coldfoot, right as the sun was setting at 2 in the afternoon. The temperature outside was 40 below zero, and I was facing 20 hours of darkness before the sun would rise again. My radio was getting nothing but static. My emergency beacon was transmitting, but help would not reach me for hours, and I had a choice to make. Stay in the truck and freeze slowly as the cab lost heat, or start walking south toward Coldfoot and hope I could cover enough distance before hypothermia took me. I chose to walk. That decision led me to discover something horrifying about remote Alaska after dark, something that connected to incidents going back decades, something that explains why certain stretches of that highway have more crosses and memorials than any road should. The first hour of walking was manageable. I had my survival gear, my headlamp, my layers of Arctic clothing. The highway stretched ahead of me in a ribbon of gray gravel, and my boots crunched through ice with a steady rhythm that kept me focused. The darkness pressed in from all sides, absolute and thick, broken only by my small circle of light. That is when I started seeing the crosses. Not the official highway memorials, but crude wooden crosses hammered into the permafrost at irregular intervals, some fresh, some weathered gray by years of exposure. Each one marked with a date but no name. December dates, all of them, clustering around the winter solstice when darkness lasted longest. I counted 18 crosses in the first mile. Far too many for a remote highway, even one as dangerous as the Dalton. And something else bothered me about them. They were not placed where accidents would happen. No curves, no drop-offs, no obvious hazards. Just straight stretches of road where vehicles should have had no trouble. The static on my radio changed as I walked. Underneath the white noise, I started hearing fragments of voices. Distorted, desperate, calling for help in situations I could not quite understand. One voice kept repeating coordinates. Another was counting down from 60, their tone growing more panicked with each number. A woman, whose voice whispered the same phrase over and over in a language I did not recognize but somehow understood in my bones. They are walking alongside the road now. They are keeping pace. Do not look at them directly. I stopped walking and turned my headlamp toward the darkness beyond the shoulder. The beam cut through maybe 30 feet of night before being swallowed completely. I saw nothing, just empty tundra and distant mountains outlined against a sky full of stars that seemed too bright, too sharp, like they were watching. But I felt something, a presence in the darkness. Not one thing but many, moving parallel to the highway, matching my speed, staying just beyond the reach of my light. I could hear them now that I was standing still, footsteps in the snow, breathing that was too deep and too slow to be human, the creak of something large shifting its weight. I started walking again, faster now, my heart hammering against my ribs. The presence kept pace, and as I moved, I started noticing other things along the highway. Abandoned vehicles, some recent, some decades old, all of them showing the same pattern. Doors hanging open, No signs of accident or collision. Just empty trucks and cars left in the middle of the road as if their drivers had simply walked away into the night. I checked the first vehicle I passed, a pickup truck that looked like it had been there for years. The keys were still in the ignition. A wallet sat on the passenger seat, ID intact, $60 in cash untouched. A cell phone was plugged into the charger, battery long dead. Whatever happened to the driver, it was not robbery or violence or any normal danger. Inside the glove compartment, I found a journal. The last entry was dated December 19th, 11 years ago. The handwriting was shaky, rushed, written by someone in the grip of fear so intense they could barely hold a pen. The entry described the same experience I was having. An engine failure, a walk toward help, the growing awareness of something following in the darkness. The journal writer had realized they were being herded, pushed along the highway toward something waiting ahead. They described how the presence would surge forward whenever they tried to leave the road, forcing them back onto the gravel, keeping them moving in a specific direction. The entry ended with a single sentence that made my blood run cold. I can see it now, up ahead where the road curves. It has been waiting for me specifically. It knows my name. I closed the journal and looked north along the highway. In the distance, maybe a mile ahead, the road curved around a small hill. I could not see what was beyond that curve, but I felt it. The same thing that journal writer had felt 11 years ago. A presence, a purpose, something that had been patient and deliberate in guiding me to this exact spot. I turned around and started walking south, back the way I had come. Immediately, the presences in the darkness moved. I could hear them rushing through the snow, cutting off my retreat, forming a wall of sound and movement that I knew instinctively I could not pass through. When I stopped, they stopped. When I turned north again, they retreated to their positions alongside the road. I was being herded, just like the journal writer, just like everyone whose crosses lined this stretch of highway. We had all been isolated, stranded, forced to walk in darkness toward something that waited patiently at that curve. My headlamp flickered, the battery was dying, and I had no spares. In 20 minutes, I would be in complete darkness, and the things that walked alongside the road would be free to do whatever they had been restraining themselves from doing. I could feel their anticipation growing. Their breathing was getting louder, more excited, like predators watching wounded prey. I had to make a decision: continue toward the curve and face whatever was waiting there, or leave the road and take my chances with the things in the darkness. I chose the curve. Some part of me needed to know, needed to understand what had taken all those people, what had left those crosses, what lurked in the longest nights of the Alaskan winter. As I walked, I started seeing other things, shapes in the darkness that my mind refused to process. Tall figures standing motionless in the distance, silhouetted against the stars. They were wrong somehow. Their proportions were off. Their stillness was too complete. They did not sway or shift or show any sign of life. But I knew they were watching me. My headlamp dimmed further. The beam was orange now, weakening, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently of the light. I could see the curve clearly now, and beyond it, something that should not exist on that empty highway. Lights, dozens of them, arranged in a circle around what looked like a structure. Not a building exactly, something else. Something that hurt to look at directly because it existed in a way that violated my understanding of space and geometry. As I got closer, I realized the lights were not electric. They were flames, burning without heat in the 40 below cold, giving off a glow that was the wrong color, that was somehow both too bright and too dim at once. They illuminated the structure at the center of the circle, and I finally understood what I was seeing. It was a collection, a gathering. Every vehicle that had been abandoned on this stretch of highway was here, arranged in neat rows like a parking lot. Dozens of trucks and cars, all empty, all with their doors open, all facing toward the structure at the center. And the structure itself was made of crosses, not the wooden ones I had seen along the highway. Something else. Arrangements of metal and bone and materials I could not identify, lashed together in patterns that seemed random but that I knew instinctively were not. This was deliberate, calculated, a construction built over decades for a specific purpose. The things that had been following me emerged from the darkness. I could see them clearly now in the light of those wrong flames. They were tall, impossibly tall. Their bodies were wrapped in something that looked like animal hides but moved like living tissue. Their faces were hidden behind masks carved from ice that never melted, even this close to the flames. They did not approach me. They simply stood at the perimeter of the circle, waiting, watching. I realized they had been doing this for years, decades, maybe longer, isolating travelers, hurting them here, adding their vehicles to the collection. But they were not killing anyone. That was the horrifying part. The vehicles were here, but where were the people? Where had all those drivers gone? I heard movement behind the structure and turned to see them. The missing people, walking in slow circles around the arrangement of crosses, their movements synchronized, their eyes open but seeing nothing. They were alive but not conscious, trapped in some state between waking and dreaming, following a path they had been walking for years. I recognized some of them from missing persons reports I had seen. A geologist who vanished 5 years ago, a survey crew that disappeared in 2007, others I did not know but whose faces showed the same empty expression, the same mechanical movements. They had been collected, preserved, kept in this place for a purpose I could not begin to understand. One of the tall figures moved toward me, and I realized it was offering me a choice. I could join the others in their eternal walk, or I could leave. But if I left, I could never speak of this place, never reveal its location, never guide anyone else here. The figure held out something that looked like a fragment of ice, glowing with the same wrong light as the flames. I understood somehow that taking it would seal the agreement. I would be marked, protected, allowed to leave but bound to silence. I took it. The ice was warm in my hand, and the moment my fingers closed around it, the world shifted. I was no longer standing in the circle of flames. I was back on the highway, 100 yards south of the curve, and the sun was rising despite the fact that it should have been hours away from dawn. A truck was approaching from the south, a search and rescue team that had been looking for me. They found me walking along the shoulder, confused and hypothermic but alive. They said I had only been missing for 3 hours, even though I had experienced an entire night of horror. My truck was found exactly where I left it. The engine damage was real, but there were no abandoned vehicles along that stretch of highway. No circles of flame, no structure made of crosses. The rescue team said I had hallucinated from cold exposure, that everything I remembered was a hypothermia-induced nightmare. But I still have the fragment of ice in my pocket. It never melts, it never warms. And sometimes, in the darkness of my apartment in Anchorage, I see shapes moving in the corners of my vision. Tall figures wrapped in hides, watching me, making sure I keep my promise. I researched the history of that highway stretch, found records of disappearances going back to the 1970s when the road was first built. Every 7 to 10 years, someone vanishes without a trace, always in December, always during the longest nights. And the investigation always concludes the same way. No evidence, no explanation. Case closed. But I know the truth now. I know why remote Alaska after dark is so dangerous. I know what walks alongside those empty highways, what herds travelers toward that terrible place, what collects the lost and forgotten and keeps them walking in circles for reasons beyond human understanding. This is why some places stay empty, why certain roads are avoided by locals who know better than to drive them in winter darkness, why crosses line the highways in patterns that map to something old and patient and endlessly hungry for company. I broke my promise by telling you this. The fragment of ice in my pocket is burning now, even though it has no heat. The figures are gathering in the shadows of my room, their masks of ice reflecting streetlight from outside. They know I spoke. They know I revealed their secret. I do not think I will survive the night, but I needed someone to know, someone to understand that the horror stories about Alaska are not exaggerations. The wilderness up there holds things that predate human civilization, that have adapted to the cold and darkness in ways that make them perfect predators of isolation. If you ever find yourself on a remote highway in Alaska after dark, and your vehicle breaks down, do not walk. Do not leave the road. And if you hear something keeping pace with you in the darkness, do not look. Do not acknowledge it, because once you see what lurks beyond the headlights, you become part of a collection that never ends. The darkness in remote Alaska is not empty. It is full of watching eyes, impatient hunger, and crosses that mark where people learn too late that some places in this world are meant to stay avoided. The cold is not the danger. The isolation is not the threat. What waits in the longest nights is something far worse. And now I have invited it into my home by speaking its secret aloud. The price of knowledge is steep in those wild places, and I am about to pay it in full. Silence spreads faster than rescue in the cold. Story 9. Cabin miles from the nearest signal. I found the hunting cabin on my third day lost in the Montana wilderness, and I wish to God I had frozen to death before I ever saw it. My truck had gone off the logging road during a whiteout. No cell signal, no GPS, just endless trees and snow that fell so thick I could barely see my own hands. The temperature had dropped to something murderous, the kind of cold that makes your lungs scream with every breath. I had two choices: stay with the overturned truck and die within hours, or walk and maybe find shelter. So I walked. For 3 days I stumbled through that frozen hell, eating snow and pine needles, feeling my fingers and toes go numb despite my layers. My mind started playing tricks. I saw shapes moving between the trees, heard voices calling my name in my dead mother's voice. Then, on that third afternoon, as the sun began its early winter descent, I saw it. A small hunting cabin, dark wood nearly invisible against the forest, smoke rising from a metal chimney. Smoke meant warmth. Smoke meant people. Smoke meant I might actually survive this nightmare. I practically crawled to that door. Nobody answered my knocking. The door was unlocked. I pushed inside and the heat hit me like a wall, so intense after days in the cold that I nearly collapsed. A wood stove blazed in the corner, freshly stoked, the logs still crackling with new flame. A kerosene lamp burned on a small table. Canned food lined rough wooden shelves. A sleeping bag lay rolled in the corner. Someone was living here. Someone had just been here, maybe minutes ago. I called out. My voice sounded strange in that small space, hoarse from dehydration and screaming into the wind during my lost days. No response, just the pop and hiss of the fire. The cabin was maybe 15 feet by 15 feet. One room, no bathroom, just a bucket in the corner that I tried not to look at. A small window, frosted over completely. The door I had entered through. No other exits. Whoever lived here traveled light and lived rough. I moved closer to the stove, my frozen fingers burning as feeling returned to them. That pain was excruciating but welcome. Pain meant I was alive. On the table beside the lamp, I noticed a journal. The leather cover was worn smooth. The pages yellowed. Something made me hesitate before opening it. Some instinct whispered that I should leave it alone, that some things are private for good reason. But I opened it anyway. The first entry was dated 6 months earlier. The handwriting was neat, methodical, the words of someone educated. It described a hunting trip, a need to get away from the noise of civilization, a desire to reconnect with something primal in these mountains. Normal stuff, the kind of thing I had told myself when I planned this trip. The next few entries detailed successful hunts, descriptions of the forest, observations about animal behavior. Still normal. Then the entries changed. 3 months in, the writer mentioned hearing things at night. Scratching at the walls, footsteps circling the cabin. He assumed it was bears or elk, though he noted the sound seemed too deliberate, too patterned. He reinforced the door, started keeping his rifle loaded beside the sleeping bag. 2 weeks later, he wrote about finding tracks in the snow. Not animal tracks, human tracks, bare feet, which made no sense in this cold. The tracks circled the cabin over and over, like someone had walked around it 100 times. But he never saw anyone. Never heard them approach or leave, just found the tracks each morning, covered by new snow by afternoon. Then he started losing time. He would be skinning a rabbit at noon and suddenly it would be midnight. The fire nearly dead, hours gone with no memory of where they went. He found food missing from his supplies. Not eaten, just gone. Cans would vanish overnight. His spare boots disappeared. A wool blanket he had hung to dry never came back inside, though he searched the surrounding woods for hours. The entries became frantic. He wrote about hearing breathing inside the cabin when he knew he was alone. About waking to find his journal open to pages he did not remember writing. About seeing shadows move across the walls in shapes that did not match the firelight. He started sleeping in brief shifts, rifle across his chest, terrified of what might happen if he slept too deeply. The final entry was dated 2 weeks ago. Just 3 words, written so hard the pen had torn through the paper. They are here. I dropped the journal. My hands were shaking and not from the cold anymore. Outside, full darkness had fallen. The window showed nothing but black. I was alone in this cabin, miles from any help, with no way to call for rescue. My truck was destroyed. I had no idea which direction led to civilization. And according to this journal, something was very wrong with this place. I told myself the writer had gone crazy from isolation. Cabin fever. It happens. People lose their minds in places like this. Start seeing things, inventing terrors to explain the crushing loneliness. That had to be it. Then I heard the footsteps, soft, deliberate, circling the cabin outside. Not the heavy crunch of boots in snow. Something lighter. Something that moved with eerie precision, maintaining the exact same distance from the walls, the exact same pace. Around and around. I grabbed the rifle from beside the sleeping bag, my heart hammering. The footsteps continued, slow, patient, never stopping, never varying. I moved to the window and scraped away the frost with my sleeve. The darkness outside was absolute. No moon, no stars, just an endless black that seemed to press against the glass. I strained my eyes, searching for any shape, any movement. Then something moved past the window. Fast, a blur of pale skin. I jerked back, raising the rifle. The footsteps continued their circuit. Around and around. I stood frozen, listening, the gun barrel wavering because my hands would not stop shaking. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The footsteps never stopped. Then they did. Total silence. Even the fire seemed to quiet. I waited, barely breathing, for something to happen. Nothing. Just that horrible silence. Somehow worse than the footsteps. At least with the footsteps I knew where they were. A scratching sound came from directly above me. From the roof. Long, slow scrapes, like fingernails on wood. Moving across the ceiling from one end to the other. Then back. Then stopping directly over my head. Something dropped down the chimney. Not into the fire. Beside it, I heard it land with a wet thump on the floor behind the stove, in the one corner I could not see from where I stood. My mind screamed at me to look, to point the rifle and see what had entered. But my body refused to move. Some animal part of my brain understood that seeing would be worse than not knowing. The breathing started then, slow, ragged, coming from behind the stove. In, out, wrong somehow, too wet, too deliberate. I do not know how long I stood there. Time seemed to break. 1 second I was standing in the lamplight, the next I was on the floor beside the door. No memory of moving. The rifle still clutched in my hands. The lamp had gone out. Only the fire provided light now. And it had burned low, casting everything in a pulsing red glow. The breathing was closer now. Right beside me, I could feel it on my neck. Cold and damp. I could smell it. Something rotten and old. But when I turned my head, nothing was there. Just empty air. Then I felt fingers on my ankle. Not grabbing. Just touching. Slowly tracing the bones beneath my skin through my boot. Impossible fingers. Too long. Too cold. Moving with that same terrible patience as the footsteps. I kicked out and hit nothing. The touching stopped. The fire flared suddenly, bright and hot, illuminating the entire cabin for one horrible second. I saw them, standing in every corner, pressed against every wall, dozens of them, pale and naked and wrong. Their limbs too long, their heads tilted at angles that should have broken their necks. All of them staring at me with eyes that reflected the firelight like animal eyes, but human eyes, aware and intelligent and hungry. Then the fire died back to embers and they vanished into shadow. I must have passed out. When I opened my eyes, sunlight streamed through the window. Morning. The fire had died completely. The cabin was empty. No figures in the corners. No breathing. No footsteps. Just silence and cold and the desperate hope that I had hallucinated everything. But my boot had marks on it. Long scratches in the leather, following the exact path those impossible fingers had traced. I ran. I did not care about the cold or my supplies or anything. I just ran, crashing through the snow in whatever direction seemed right, not looking back, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. I fell a dozen times, got up, kept running. The rescue team found me 2 days later, hypothermic and incoherent, miles from where my truck had gone off the road. They said I was lucky, said another few hours and I would have died. Asked where I had sheltered to survive so long. I told them about the cabin, described its location as best I could. They searched, sent helicopters, ground teams. They never found it. No cabin exists where I said it was. No structure anywhere in that area. They showed me satellite images. Just forest, just trees, nothing else. But I know what I saw. I know what touched me. I know what waited in those shadows. And sometimes, late at night in my apartment back in civilization, I hear them. Soft footsteps, circling, around and around, getting closer, patient, so terribly patient. They are here. The final story explains why some areas remain empty. Story 10. Call that never reached town. The distress call came through at 3 in the morning, and the voice on the other end was so terrified that dispatch thought it was a prank. But I knew better. After 15 years as a search and rescue coordinator in Alaska, I had heard real fear before, and this was different. This was the sound of someone who had seen something that broke them. The caller was a geologist named Robert Chen, part of a team studying permafrost changes in the interior. His voice cracked through heavy static, barely coherent, repeating the same horrifying phrase over and over. They found something that should not be there. Something that was moving toward them in the darkness. The coordinates he gave made no sense. They placed him in an area that our maps showed as uninhabited wilderness, 200 miles from the nearest settlement. But the GPS data kept shifting, jumping around like he was moving at impossible speeds or like something was interfering with the signal. Then the call cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a sound that still gives me nightmares. A low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate through the phone itself, and beneath it, something that sounded like breathing. We launched the rescue operation at first light, but winter conditions were brutal. 70 below zero with winds that made helicopter flight impossible. It took us 3 days to reach the area where we thought Chen had been calling from, and what we found there changed everything I believed about the Alaskan wilderness. There was a camp, 3 tents arranged in a triangle, scientific equipment scattered everywhere, and signs of a hasty evacuation. But no people, no bodies, no footprints leading away from the site. The team had simply vanished in the middle of their work, leaving behind their supplies, their emergency beacons, even their cold weather gear. In 70 below temperatures, abandoning your gear is a death sentence. Nobody does that unless they are running from something worse than freezing. I found Chen's journal inside the main tent. The final entries were disturbing, written in increasingly frantic handwriting that deteriorated into barely legible scrawls. The team had been drilling core samples when they broke through into a void space beneath the permafrost. A massive cavern that should not exist in ground that had been frozen solid for thousands of years. Chen described lowering a camera into the opening. The footage showed something impossible. The cavern was warm. Steam rose from pools of water that glowed with a bioluminescent light. And there were structures down there. Not natural formations, buildings, or something like buildings. Geometric shapes that hurt to look at because they existed in dimensions that human eyes were not meant to perceive. But what terrified Chen was not the structures. It was what moved between them. Shadows that cast their own light. Figures that were tall and thin and moved in ways that violated physics. And the sound, that terrible low-frequency hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, that resonated in your chest and made your thoughts feel slow and confused. The journal entry ended with a single sentence that made my hands shake. It knows we are here. It is coming up. I radioed back to base and requested a full investigation team. But before they could arrive, I noticed something wrong about the camp. The equipment was not scattered randomly. It was arranged, in patterns, circles within circles, with the drilling site at the center. And the items themselves were strange. GPS units with their screens showing coordinates that did not match any location on Earth. Cameras with memory cards full of images that were just static and shadow, but that somehow conveyed a sense of depth and movement. I approached the drilling site. The hole they had made was wider now. Much wider. As if something had forced its way up from below, enlarging the opening. The edges were smooth, melted, and the warmth rising from the hole was wrong. It carried a smell like ozone and decay, and it made my skin crawl with a sensation like static electricity. I shined my light down into the darkness. The beam did not penetrate far. It was swallowed by shadow that seemed thicker than normal darkness, that seemed to have weight and substance. But in the brief moment before the light vanished, I saw something at the bottom of the hole. A reflection. Eyes, dozens of them, looking up at me. I stepped back from the hole, and that is when I heard it. The hum, coming from beneath the ground, vibrating through the ice, growing louder. And with it came a feeling of wrongness so intense it made me nauseous. The air pressure changed. My ears popped. The temperature dropped even further. And frost formed on my gear in patterns that looked almost like writing. Something was rising. I could feel it. Not just hear it or sense it. Feel it, like a presence pushing up through layers of frozen earth, forcing itself into a world it had been separated from for ages beyond counting. The hole began to glow with that same bioluminescent light Chen had described. A sickly green radiance that cast shadows in all directions at once. I ran back to my snowmobile. My hands shook so badly I could barely start the engine. But as I gunned the throttle and raced away from the camp, I made the mistake of looking back. The thing emerging from the hole was massive. It unfolded from the opening like something being birthed, its form too large to fit through that space. It was made of light and shadow simultaneously, existing in a state that my mind could not process. Where it touched the ground, the snow did not melt. It vanished, simply ceased to exist, as if the thing was erasing reality itself. I rode for 3 hours straight, not stopping until I reached the coordinates where our helicopter was waiting. The pilot took one look at my face and asked what happened. I tried to explain, but the words would not come. My memory of the thing was already fading, as if my brain was protecting itself by refusing to retain the image. We returned with a full team the next day. Military personnel, scientists, equipment designed to document everything. But the camp was gone. Not destroyed, gone. The area where the tents had stood showed no signs of ever being disturbed. The permafrost was solid and unbroken. The drilling site did not exist. We searched for 3 days. Found nothing. No trace of Chen or his team. No evidence that anyone had been there. The rescue was quietly closed. The official report said the team had been lost in a storm and that their bodies would likely never be recovered. No mention of the distress call. No mention of what I had seen. But I kept Chen's journal. I smuggled it out before it could be confiscated. And I have read it dozens of times, trying to understand what happened. Trying to make sense of the final entry that I had not noticed during my first reading. It was written in the margin, in handwriting that was not Chen's. In handwriting that was too perfect, too precise, like it had been printed rather than written. It said simply, "The call was heard. The door is open. We are coming through." 6 months later, there was another distress call. Different location, different team, same pattern. Uninhabited wilderness, impossible coordinates. A terrified voice describing something emerging from beneath the ice. And then silence. This has happened 4 more times in the past 2 years. Always in winter. Always in remote areas. Always with the same result. Teams vanishing. Evidence disappearing. And that horrible hum that vibrates through the emergency channels, getting louder with each incident. I believe his team broke through to something that had been sealed away. Something that had been imprisoned beneath the permafrost for reasons we cannot imagine. And now it is free. Now it is spreading, opening more doorways, pulling more people into whatever dimension it inhabits. The calls keep coming. The coordinates keep shifting. And every winter, more search teams go out and fewer come back. Those of us who have seen what lurks beneath the ice carry a fear that never leaves. A knowledge that the Alaskan wilderness is far more dangerous than weather or wildlife. There are things under the permafrost. Ancient things, patient things, things that were buried when the ice first formed and that are now being released as the climate changes and the ground thaws. We are not just facing environmental disaster. We are opening doors that were meant to stay closed forever. The distress calls continue. The vanishings continue. And I know that someday I will receive a call with my own voice on the other end, terrified and broken, describing something coming toward me in the darkness. Because that is what happens to everyone who learns this secret. We are marked, chosen, destined to become part of whatever is emerging from beneath the ice. The call that never reached town was not the first. It will not be the last. And the thing that answered when Chen broke through is still there. Still growing, still spreading through tunnels and voids beneath the frozen earth. Waiting for the next team to drill in the wrong place. Waiting for the next door to open. I am writing this as a warning. If you ever work in remote Alaska and you find warm ground where there should be permafrost, do not investigate. Do not drill. Do not look into the darkness below, because something is looking back. Something that has been waiting for thousands of years to escape its prison. And it is using us to open the doors. The coordinates were never unclear. The GPS was never malfunctioning. The locations were shifting because the thing beneath the ice exists in multiple places simultaneously. It is spread across the entire interior, connected through tunnels and spaces that violate our understanding of geography and dimension. We are not rescuing people anymore. We are feeding it, every team we send out, every search party that vanishes. We are giving it what it needs to grow stronger, to push further into our reality. The call came from deep in Alaska's interior, but it was not Chen calling for help. It was something else using his voice, testing us, learning how we respond to distress. And now it knows. Now it can mimic us perfectly. Now it can call for help in 1,000 voices and draw us deeper into the wilderness where it waits. No trace was ever found because there was nothing to find. The people are not dead. They are somewhere else, somewhere beneath the ice where the rules are different and horror is the only constant. And someday soon that place will finish emerging into our world. The winter conditions did not make travel impossible. They made escape impossible for the things coming up from below, for the things that thrive in cold and darkness, for the things that are finally free after an imprisonment that lasted longer than human civilization. This is the truth about Alaska. This is the secret that those of us in search and rescue carry. We are not saving people. We are documenting an invasion, and we have already lost.